Ma'am, people like you don't shop here without stealing something, Officer Ryan Keller said loudly, his voice cutting through the polished calm of the mall like a blade, completely unaware that the woman he was about to humiliate was the very captain who could end his career with a single word. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun filtered through the wide glass panels of Westbrook Galleria, casting soft golden reflections across the marble floors. Shoppers moved in a steady rhythm, the quiet hum of conversations blending with the distant notes of instrumental music drifting from hidden speakers. It was the kind of place designed to feel untouchable, clean, controlled, and comfortably distant from anything unpleasant. Sarah Rollins walked through the center of it all with measured steps, her posture relaxed but deliberate, as though every movement had been rehearsed through years of discipline. She wore a simple navy blouse, tailored slacks, and low heels, nothing that demanded attention, nothing that hinted at authority. In one hand, she held her phone, scrolling briefly before slipping it back in her purse. In the other, she carried a small list, neatly folded, the kind someone makes when the errand matters. Her niece was turning 10 tomorrow, and Sarah had promised herself she would find something meaningful, something that would last longer than a passing trend. To anyone watching, she was just another woman enjoying a quiet afternoon, taking her time between storefronts lined with glass and polished chrome. But there was a steadiness in her gaze, a quiet awareness in the way her eyes moved. Not darting, not nervous, but observant, cataloging without effort. Years of command had shaped that instinct into something second nature. She paused briefly outside a boutique known for its handcrafted jewelry, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. For a moment, she allowed herself to soften, imagining her niece's smile, the excitement in her voice. It was a rare pause from the weight she usually carried, a moment where she could simply exist without expectation. Behind her, unnoticed by most, a security camera adjusted its angle. In a small back office, a monitor flickered as an employee leaned closer, narrowing her eyes. From the floor, another staff member slowed his pace, pretending to reorganize a display while stealing glances in Sarah's direction. The shift was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not trained to recognize it. But Sarah felt it, not immediately, not as a sharp alarm, but as a faint disturbance in the rhythm around her. A slight delay in footsteps, a gaze that lingered a second too long. She did not turn. She did not react. Instead, she continued forward, stepping into the boutique as the soft chime above the door announced her presence. The scent of vanilla and polished wood wrapped around her instantly, warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the quiet tension beginning to coil beneath the surface. Inside, the displays shimmered under focused lighting, rows of delicate pieces arranged with surgical precision. Sarah approached a glass case, her reflection merging with the sparkle of silver and gemstones. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the counter, steady, controlled. For now, everything still appeared normal. But the atmosphere had already begun to change, tightening in ways that could not yet be seen, only felt like the first distant rumble before a storm. Sarah's fingers remained resting on the cool edge of the glass case, her reflection steady, but her attention had already shifted beyond the jewelry. She could feel it now, clearer than before. The subtle tightening of space around her, the way movement in the boutique had begun to orbit her presence. Behind the counter, Linda Graves stood unusually still, her polite smile frozen just a fraction too long before it faded into something sharper, more calculated. "Can I help you with something?" Linda asked, her tone crisp, overly formal, as though each word had been rehearsed for control rather than service. Sarah turned her head slightly, offering a small, courteous nod. "I'm just browsing for now. Thank you." Her voice was even, unhurried, carrying none of the tension that had begun to gather in the room. Linda did not move away. Instead, she stepped closer, her heels clicking lightly against the polished floor, positioning herself just within Sarah's peripheral vision. Her eyes flicked down to Sarah's purse, then back up again, repeating the motion with increasing frequency, as if searching for confirmation of something she had already decided was true. From a corner of the boutique, one of the sales associates pretended to adjust a display, though his hands hovered uncertainly, his gaze drifting repeatedly towards Sarah before quickly snapping away whenever she shifted slightly. Outside the glass storefront, a security guard slowed his patrol, his head tilting just enough to glance in, his posture stiffening as he spoke quietly into his shoulder radio. Sarah's breathing remained steady, but the rhythm of the environment had changed. Conversations lowered, footsteps hesitated, and an invisible line seemed to form around her, as though the space itself was quietly pushing her into the center of something she had not agreed to. She reached toward the display, her fingers hovering above a delicate silver bracelet shaped with a small butterfly charm. "May I see this one?" she asked, her tone still composed, her focus precise. Linda hesitated just for a moment before forcing a tight smile. "Of course." She unlocked the case with deliberate care, her movements stiff, almost reluctant, as if every second bought her time to confirm her suspicions. As she handed the bracelet over, her eyes never left Sarah's hands. Sarah examined the piece with quiet appreciation, tilting it slightly to catch the light, imagining the way it would look on her niece's wrist. For a brief second, the world narrowed back down to something simple, something human. But it did not last. "I'm going to need you to keep that where I can see it," Linda said suddenly, her voice sharper now, stripped of any pretense of warmth. Sarah looked up slowly, her expression unchanged, though there was a new stillness behind her eyes. "It is right here," she replied, holding the bracelet slightly higher, her movements deliberate. Linda's jaw tightened, her fingers curling slightly at her sides. "We have had issues lately," she continued, her voice rising just enough to carry beyond the counter. "Items going missing. People thinking they can just walk in and take what they want." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Outside, the security guard had stopped completely now, his radio murmuring again, his gaze fixed through the glass. Sarah placed the bracelet gently back onto the counter, her movements careful, controlled. She did not react to the accusation, not outwardly, but the calm around her had shifted into something firmer, less yielding. "If there is a concern," she said quietly, "you can check your inventory." Linda let out a short breath through her nose, her patience clearly thinning. "Oh, we will," she replied, her tone edged with something close to satisfaction. "But first, I think it would be best if you stayed right where you are." The air in the boutique tightened further, the invisible pressure building as footsteps approached from outside. Heavier now, more deliberate. The storm that had been quietly forming was no longer distant. It was at the door. The boutique door chimed again, but this time the sound carried a different weight, sharper, more deliberate, as two uniformed officers stepped inside with the kind of presence that demanded attention without asking for it. Officer Ryan Keller entered first, his shoulders squared, his gaze already locked onto Sarah, as though he had made his decision before even crossing the threshold. Behind him, Officer Luke Henson followed half a step slower, scanning the room, his jaw tight, feeding off Ryan's momentum. The quiet murmur of the boutique collapsed into silence. Linda exhaled as if relief had finally arrived in the form of authority. "Officers," she said quickly, stepping forward, her voice edged with urgency. "That's her. She's been acting suspicious, and I believe she took something from the case." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line that suggested he had heard this story many times before, and always knew how it ended. He approached Sarah without hesitation, boots striking the floor with measured force, stopping just a step too close, invading her space in a way that was unmistakably intentional. "Ma'am," he said, his tone already carrying a layer of accusation, "I'm going to need you to show me what is in your bag." Sarah did not move immediately. Her posture remained upright, her hands relaxed at her sides, her expression calm but no longer soft. She met his gaze evenly, neither challenging nor yielding. "Is there a reason for this request?" "Officer," she asked, her voice steady, precise, each word placed with care. Ryan let out a quiet breath through his nose, a faint curl forming at the corner of his mouth, as though her composure irritated him more than defiance would have. "We have a report of stolen merchandise," he replied, his voice rising just enough to ensure everyone in the boutique could hear. "And right now, you are the only one matching that report." Luke shifted slightly to Sarah's side, positioning himself to block any easy movement toward the exit, his stance wide, his arms loose but ready. The message was clear. They were not here to ask, they were here to control. Sarah's eyes flicked briefly between them, noting the angles, the spacing, the silent coordination. Years of experience registered the pattern instantly, but her face revealed none of it. "I've not taken anything," she said simply. Linda stepped in again, her voice sharper now, fueled by the presence of backup. "I saw her," she insisted, pointing towards Sarah's purse. She was hovering over the display, and then she moved her hands quickly. "Something is missing." Ryan nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if that was all the confirmation he needed. "You heard her," he said, his attention snapping back to Sarah. "So here is how this is going to go. You can cooperate and make this easy, or we can do it the hard way." The words settled heavily in the room, drawing the attention of shoppers just outside the boutique, their curious glances turning into lingering stares. Sarah inhaled slowly, her chest rising in a controlled rhythm, her gaze unwavering. "I am standing right here," she replied, her tone neither submissive nor confrontational. "There is no need to escalate this." Ryan's jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation passing across his face as though her calm denied him the reaction he expected. "Oh, it has already escalated," he said, his voice dropping lower, more pointed. "You just have not realized it yet." Luke stepped closer, his presence closing the remaining distance, subtly guiding Sarah backward with the pressure of proximity rather than force, boxing her in against the display counter. The glass behind her reflected the scene. 2 officers looming, a manager watching, and a woman who refused to shrink. The tension in the room thickened, pressing against every surface, as the situation crossed an invisible line from suspicion into something far more deliberate. The invisible line shattered the moment Ryan reached forward. His hand closed around Sarah's wrist, not violently, but with a firm, unmistakable grip meant to establish control. "Turn around," he ordered, his voice louder now, projecting authority for the growing crowd just beyond the boutique entrance. Sarah did not resist the contact, but she did not comply immediately either. Her gaze dropped briefly to his hand on her wrist, then lifted back to his eyes, calm and unwavering. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly, each word measured, carrying more weight than its volume suggested. Ryan's expression hardened, irritation sharpening his features. "No," he snapped, tightening his hold just enough to signal impatience. "The mistake would be letting you walk out of here." Luke stepped in closer from the side, his presence closing off any remaining space, his hand hovering near Sarah's other arm as if ready to seize it at a moment's notice. "We can do this right here," Luke added, his tone edged with anticipation, "or we can take you somewhere less comfortable." A few people had gathered at the storefront now, their reflections flickering in the glass, phones subtly raised, capturing every second. Linda stood just behind the officers, arms crossed, her chin lifted slightly, as though the situation had already confirmed everything she believed. Sarah slowly extended her free hand, opening her palm in a controlled, deliberate motion. "There is no need for this," she said again, her voice steady, her breathing even. "You can check your inventory, review your cameras. I have taken nothing." Ryan gave a short, dismissive exhale, his grip shifting as he guided her arm behind her back. "Save it," he said, his tone flattening into something colder. "We have heard every excuse there is." The movement was precise, practiced. He brought her other arm back, Luke stepping in to assist, their coordination seamless as they positioned her wrists together. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked into place, not loudly, but with a finality that cut through the room. A ripple moved through the onlookers, a mixture of shock and curiosity, the tension feeding on itself. Sarah stood still as the cuffs settled around her wrists, her shoulders squared, her posture unbroken. There was no struggle, no raised voice, no sign of panic. Only a quiet stillness that seemed to resist the chaos forming around her. Ryan released her wrist, stepping back just enough to look at her fully, his chest rising with controlled breaths, as if asserting dominance through proximity alone had not been enough. "Now," he said, gesturing sharply toward her purse, "we're going to take a look inside." Without waiting for permission, he reached for the bag, pulling it from her shoulder with a firm tug. The strap slid free, the motion abrupt but calculated, sending a subtle shift through the crowd as more phones angled for a better view. He placed the purse on the glass counter and began to open it, his movements quick, invasive, turning over personal items without hesitation. A wallet, a phone, neatly folded papers, each piece removed and spread out under the boutique lights like evidence already condemned. Luke watched closely, his eyes scanning for anything that could justify what they had already decided. Linda leaned in slightly, her breath held, anticipation tightening her features. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the glass behind the counter. Hands restrained, belongings exposed, surrounded by authority that had already chosen its narrative. And yet, her expression did not crack. Not even slightly. The room had reached its breaking point, the tension stretched thin, waiting for something, anything, to snap it in two. For a brief moment, the entire boutique seemed to hold its breath as Ryan's hands continued moving through Sarah's belongings, each item turned over with increasing impatience. The soft rustle of leather and paper sounded unnaturally loud against the silence, punctuated only by the faint murmur of the crowd outside. He checked every compartment, every fold, his fingers pressing deeper as though force alone could produce evidence that did not exist. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, frustration beginning to edge into his tone. People do not just get accused for nothing. Luke leaned closer, his posture tightening, his eyes narrowing as he watched the search unfold. "Maybe she ditched it," he suggested, glancing briefly toward the door, then back at Sarah, as if expecting her to bolt at any second. "Or maybe it is tucked somewhere we have not checked yet." Ryan exhaled sharply, clearly irritated by the lack of results, and began placing items back onto the counter with less care than before, the neat arrangement dissolving into scattered disarray. "You got anything on you?" he asked abruptly, his gaze snapping back to Sarah, his voice louder now, feeding off the attention surrounding them. "Pockets, hidden compartments, anything you think we would not notice?" Sarah stood exactly where they had positioned her, her wrists secure behind her back, her shoulders steady despite the strain. Her eyes remained fixed on Ryan, not with defiance, but with a calm that seemed to absorb his aggression without reacting to it. "You have searched my bag," she replied evenly. "There is nothing there, and there is nothing on me." Linda stepped forward again, her patience clearly worn thin, her voice cutting through the tension with renewed certainty. "Then where did it go?" she demanded, her gaze darting between the officers and Sarah. "I know what I saw. That bracelet is missing." Ryan turned slightly toward Linda, nodding once, as if her insistence reignited his resolve. "All right," he said, his tone shifting into something more decisive, more forceful. "If it is not in the bag, then we're going to check the rest." He stepped closer to Sarah again, his presence looming, his hand reaching toward her side as though preparing to conduct a full search without hesitation. "This is your last chance to make things easy," he added, his voice dropping lower, each word deliberate. "Because once we start, it is going to get a lot more uncomfortable." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd, some faces tightening, others leaning in closer, drawn by the unfolding confrontation. Phones remained raised, recording, capturing every second of what had already crossed into something far beyond a routine inquiry. Sarah's gaze did not waver. If anything, it grew steadier, more focused, as though a decision had quietly settled within her. "You are already making it uncomfortable," she said, her voice calm but firmer now, carrying just enough to be heard beyond the immediate circle. Ryan's jaw flexed, the muscle tightening beneath his skin as her composure continued to deny him the reaction he seemed to crave. He glanced briefly at Luke, a silent exchange passing between them, before stepping even closer, his hand hovering near her side, ready to proceed. The situation had reached its peak, the pressure in the room pressing against every person watching, every surface reflecting the moment back at itself. And still, Sarah Rollins stood there, unshaken, restrained, surrounded, waiting, as if she knew something none of them did, as if the next move would not come from them at all. Ryan's hand hovered just inches from Sarah's side, the moment stretched thin, teetering on the edge of escalation. The crowd had gone quieter now, the earlier murmurs replaced by a tense, expectant stillness, as if everyone sensed that whatever happened next would define everything that followed. Ryan straightened slightly, withdrawing his hand just enough to shift tactics, his expression hardening into something colder, more procedural. "All right," he said, his voice firm, carrying authority with practiced ease. "We're done playing around." He reached for his radio briefly, then lowered it again, deciding against it, as though he did not need backup. To finish what he had started. "You are being detained on suspicion of theft," he continued, each word deliberate, final. "We will take you downtown, process you, and figure out the rest there." Luke nodded beside him, his stance loosening just enough to suggest the outcome was already decided. "Yeah," he added, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "A lot easier to sort this out at the station than in front of a crowd." Linda exhaled sharply behind them, her posture relaxing for the first time since the confrontation began, as if justice, her version of it, was finally being carried out. Sarah did not move. Her shoulders remained squared, her chin level, her breathing steady despite the tightening cuffs at her wrists. For a brief second, she lowered her gaze, not in submission, but in consideration, before lifting it again to meet Ryan's eyes. And when she spoke, her voice was quieter than before, but sharper, each word cutting clean through the tension. "Officer Keller," she said, using his name with precision, as if placing it exactly where it belonged. Ryan blinked once, caught off guard for the smallest fraction of a second, before his expression hardened again. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his tone edged with suspicion. Sarah held his gaze, unflinching. "Because I know exactly who you are," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, but carrying something deeper now, something that hinted at a shift none of them had yet fully grasped. "And I'm giving you one last opportunity to stop what you are doing." The words settled into the room like a weight, subtle but undeniable. Luke let out a low, disbelieving chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "You hear that?" he muttered to Ryan. "She's threatening us now." Ryan's lips curled into a thin smile, humorless, dismissive. "That is not going to work," he said, his tone dropping into something almost amused. "You think throwing around names or acting calm is going to scare me?" Sarah's expression did not change. If anything, it grew more still, more resolute, as though she had already expected this response. "I'm not trying to scare you," she said quietly. "I'm trying to prevent you from making a mistake you cannot undo." Ryan let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he stepped closer again, his presence pressing in, reclaiming control of the space. "Too late for that," he replied, his voice firm, final. "You should have thought about consequences before you decided to take something that was not yours." He gestured toward the door with a sharp motion. "Let's go." Luke moved to guide Sarah forward, his hand reaching for her arm, ready to escort her out in front of everyone watching. The last chance had been offered and dismissed. And just like that, the path forward was no longer in their hands, even if they still believed it was. Luke's hand closed around Sarah's arm, firm and guiding, beginning to steer her toward the boutique entrance. The crowd instinctively shifted, parting just enough to create a narrow path, phones still raised, capturing what they believed was the final act of a routine arrest. Sarah took one step forward, then stopped, Not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to break the rhythm. Luke felt it immediately, a subtle resistance that did not match her otherwise compliant posture. "Keep moving," he muttered under his breath, tightening his grip slightly. Sarah turned her head, just enough to look at him, then at Ryan. Her expression had changed, not in anger, not in fear, but in certainty. The kind that did not need volume to command attention. "No," she said quietly. The single word landed with unexpected weight. Ryan frowned, stepping forward again, ready to reassert control. "We are not doing this," he said, his tone sharpening, but there was a flicker of something else now. Uncertainty, faint but present. Sarah shifted her wrists slightly behind her back, the metal cuffs glinting under the boutique lights. "You're going to take these off," she continued, her voice calm, steady, but no longer offering options. Right now, a ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but undeniable. Luke let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "Yeah, that is not happening," he said, but his voice lacked the earlier edge, the confidence thinning at the edges. Sarah did not look at him again. Her eyes remained on Ryan. "You said you wanted to take me downtown," she went on, each word deliberate, controlled. "So let's do this properly." She straightened slightly, her posture shifting, not resisting, not retreating, but rising into something unmistakable. "Call it in," she said. "Run my name." Ryan's jaw tightened. "We already know what is going on here," he replied, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. Sarah's gaze did not waver. "Then you should not have a problem confirming it," she said. A pause followed. Not long, but long enough. Long enough for doubt to slip in. Luke glanced at Ryan, the silent question hanging between them. Ryan hesitated, then reached for his radio almost reflexively, as if to prove a point rather than out of necessity. "Dispatch," he said, his voice controlled, but quieter now, less performative. "I need a name check." His eyes flicked back to Sarah. "Name?" Sarah held his gaze, her voice clear, unwavering. "Captain Sarah Rollins. Badge number 4172. The words did not echo. They settled. Heavy. Final. For a brief second, nothing happened. Then the radio crackled. A voice came through, sharp, alert, immediate. "Unit, repeat that name." Ryan swallowed, his grip on the radio tightening. "Sarah Rollins. Badge 4172. Silence. Then, "Unit, confirm. Are you currently in contact with Captain Rollins?" The shift was instant. It moved through Ryan's posture, through the tightening of his shoulders, through the way his eyes flicked back to Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. Luke's hand loosened on her arm without him realizing it. The crowd, sensing the change, leaned in closer, the energy transforming from anticipation to shock. The radio crackled again, louder this time, urgency unmistakable. "Unit, do not proceed. I repeat, do not proceed. That is your commanding officer." The words hit like a physical force. Ryan's face drained of color, the certainty that had fueled him collapsing in an instant. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Luke stepped back, his hand dropping completely from Sarah's arm, as if it had burned him. Linda's breath caught behind them, her confidence shattering into visible confusion. Sarah stood exactly where she had been, cuffs still on her wrists, her posture unchanged, but now the entire room had shifted around her. The power had not appeared suddenly. It had been there all along. They had simply failed to see it, and now it was undeniable. The boutique remained frozen in the aftermath of the radio's words, the air no longer tense, but fractured, as if the entire scene had been split open to reveal something far heavier beneath it. Ryan stood motionless for a beat too long, the authority he had carried just moments ago slipping from his posture like something he could no longer hold on to. His hand, still gripping the radio, trembled, slightly before he lowered it, eyes fixed on Sarah with a dawning realization that drained the last trace of confidence from his face. Luke took another step back, creating distance, as if instinctively trying to separate himself from the situation, his gaze dropping to the floor, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. Linda's earlier certainty collapsed entirely. Her arms, once crossed in rigid conviction, fell to her sides, fingers twitching as she struggled to process what had just unfolded. Sarah did not raise her voice. She did not move with urgency. Instead, she turned her head slightly, addressing Ryan with the same composed authority she had carried from the beginning. Only now it was unmistakable, undeniable. "Remove them," she said, her tone quiet but absolute. There was no hesitation in her voice, no need to explain or justify. Ryan reacted instantly this time, his hands moving quickly, almost clumsily, as he stepped behind her. The metallic release of the cuffs sounded far louder than when they had been placed, echoing through the boutique like a reversal of everything that had just occurred. As the restraints fell away, Sarah brought her hands forward slowly, rubbing one wrist with controlled restraint, not out of pain, but as a measured acknowledgement of what had been done. Ryan stepped back, his posture now rigid in a completely different way, as if bracing for impact rather than asserting control. "Captain, he began, but the words faltered, collapsing under the weight of the moment. Sarah turned to face him fully. Her gaze was steady, her expression firm, not fueled by anger, but by something far more final: accountability. "You detained me without evidence," she said, each word precise, leaving no room for interpretation. "You conducted an unlawful search. You escalated a situation that did not exist." The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, the crowd had gone from curious to stunned, the phone still raised, but now capturing something entirely different: the unraveling of authority rather than its display. The faint sound of approaching footsteps broke through the stillness as additional officers entered the boutique, their expressions already tense, alerted by dispatch. Their eyes moved quickly from Sarah to Ryan, then to Luke, the situation understood in an instant without a single word needing to be spoken. One of them, a senior sergeant, stepped forward, his posture respectful as he addressed Sarah directly. "Captain Rollins," he said, his tone measured, "we just got the call. Are you all right?" Sarah gave a small nod, her composure intact. "I am," she replied, then gestured subtly toward Ryan and Luke. "But this needs to be documented. Fully." The sergeant's jaw tightened slightly as he turned toward the two officers, his gaze hardening. "Both of you," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument, "step aside. Now." Ryan did not protest. He could not. The shift in power was complete, absolute, leaving him standing exactly where Sarah had been moments before, exposed, watched, and without control. Linda remained frozen near the counter, her earlier accusations now hanging in the air like evidence against her. Sarah glanced briefly at the scattered contents of her purse still spread across the glass, then back at the room as a whole. The boutique, once pristine and orderly, now felt like a stage where something irreversible had taken place. And at the center of it all stood the truth, no longer hidden, no longer ignored, and no longer something anyone in that room could escape. The boutique slowly exhaled as the weight of the moment began to lift, the sharp tension that had filled every corner dissolving into something quieter, more reflective. The additional officers moved with quiet efficiency now, guiding Ryan and Luke away from the center of the room, their earlier authority replaced by a stiff, subdued compliance. Neither of them spoke. Ryan's gaze remained fixed somewhere ahead, unfocused, as if replaying the past few minutes in a loop he could not escape. Luke kept his head lowered, his shoulders drawn inward, the earlier confidence gone without a trace. Near the counter, Linda stood frozen, her lips parted slightly, as if searching for words that refused to come. The certainty that had fueled her accusations had evaporated completely, leaving behind only the uncomfortable reality of what she had set in motion. The sergeant exchanged a brief word with another officer, his tone low but firm, already outlining next steps, documentation, procedures, each piece of accountability falling into place with quiet inevitability. Sarah Rollins remained at the center of it all for a moment longer, her presence steady, grounded. She reached for her purse, her movements unhurried, and began gathering her belongings from the glass counter. Each item was returned to its place with deliberate care, restoring order not just to her bag, but to the space itself. The scattered disarray faded under her hands, replaced by the same quiet control she had carried from the beginning. As she finished, she paused briefly, her fingers resting against the soft leather, her gaze lifting to meet the reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at her was composed, unchanged, untouched by the chaos that had tried and failed to define her. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The onlookers who had once watched with curiosity now stood in respectful silence, their phones lowering, their expressions altered by the understanding of what they had witnessed. No one spoke, but the acknowledgement was there, carried in the stillness, in the space they gave her as she stepped away from the counter. The sergeant approached once more, his posture straight, his tone respectful. "Captain Rollins," he said, "we will handle everything from here. Internal Affairs has already been notified." Sarah gave a small nod, her expression calm, measured. "Make sure it is thorough," she replied, her voice steady. "Every detail matters." "Yes, ma'am," he answered without hesitation. For a moment, nothing more needed to be said. Sarah turned toward the exit, her steps quiet against the polished floor. The crowd parted again, but this time not out of curiosity or tension, out of respect. As she passed, a few people lowered their eyes, others gave small, silent nods, the shift in perception complete. Outside the boutique, the mall continued its steady rhythm, the distant hum of life unchanged, as if the storm that had passed through had left no visible mark, only a deeper understanding beneath the surface. Sarah stepped into that space without hesitation, her posture relaxed once more, her presence blending seamlessly back into the world she had entered earlier that afternoon. She paused briefly near the storefront window, glancing once at the display of bracelets, her eyes settling on the small butterfly charm she had chosen. A faint, almost imperceptible softness touched her expression. Then, without ceremony, she continued on, disappearing into the flow of the mall, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than anything that had come before, a silence shaped by justice, restored order, and the quiet certainty that some lines, once crossed, would always lead to consequence.